I walked into that Munich conference room 2 hours late, wrinkled suit, coffee stain on my sleeve, and Kyle Brennan clapped his hands like he was starting a pep rally. "Let's dive in, team," he announced loud enough to echo off the walls. "Big things coming. We're here to disrupt some outdated supply models." Then he looked straight at Herr Muller, Muller Industries operations director, and said, "You ready, boss man?" I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. "My name's Drew Patterson. I'm 41, been working international logistics for 15 years, based out of Chicago. I'd spent over a year building this $240 million partnership with Muller Industries. Countless emails, midnight calls across time zones, learning about their family business that went back 4 generations to post-war reconstruction. I knew their supply chain better than most of their own people. I understood exactly why their current container routing through Hamburg was hemorrhaging money, 18% over optimal costs because of outdated slot allocation and poor customs coordination. And Kyle just called the head of their operations boss, man. Look, German business culture runs on something called Ordnung, proper procedure, systematic approach, respect for hierarchy. You don't walk in and start throwing around casual American nicknames. You show respect. You follow established protocols. You understand that preparation matters more than personality. I'd learned this through trial and error over the past year. The firm handshake with direct eye contact. Always Herr Muller, never just Muller. Being precisely on time, not early, not late, exactly when scheduled. I'd brought Herr Mueller a bottle of small batch bourbon from near Chicago because I'd remembered him mentioning American whiskeys during our third video call. Details matter in relationship building. Kyle had been at Apex for exactly 37 days. Strategic VP from corporate headquarters shipped over because our European numbers looked soft on quarterly reports. The guy carried himself like he was still pitching venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, complete with the leather messenger bag and enough cologne to announce his presence from the elevator. My flight from O'Hare got rerouted through Frankfurt, then delayed 3 hours because someone tried bringing a commercial drone through security. No time to change clothes or grab a shower. I walked straight into Muller Tower wearing the same navy suit I'd slept in, hoping my preparation would overcome my appearance. The Muller team was already assembled when I arrived. 3 men in perfectly pressed suits, fresh coffee arranged precisely, documents aligned like they were expecting a military inspection. Everything about the room said these people valued precision and control. I shook hands with Herr Muller and apologized for the delay in German. Basic courtesy. Before I could even sit down, Kyle was already taking control like he owned the building. "Let's skip the formalities," he said, cutting across my attempt to properly address the team. "We're not here for pleasantries. We're here to transform your logistics infrastructure." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Herr Mueller kept his expression neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. His colleague Dr. Weber from procurement stopped taking notes mid-sentence. The third man, Hoffman from finance, placed his pen down and folded his hands, a distinctly German signal that things had gone off track. Kyle opened my presentation without missing a beat. My slides, my 14 months of research and relationship building, my customized solutions for Muller's specific operational challenges. He'd made minimal changes, just swapped out my name for his on the title slide and added some Silicon Valley buzzwords to the executive summary. "The key here is scalable disruption," Kyle announced. Clicking through slides I'd crafted specifically around Muller's conservative expansion philosophy. We're looking at paradigm shifts in supply chain methodology. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there knowing every number in that deck. The 23% reduction in port dwell time I'd identified through better customs documentation. The $12 million annual savings from optimizing their container return logistics. The relationships with Hamburg port authorities I'd spent months developing to secure preferential slot allocations. Kyle had clearly skimmed the content but missed the substance entirely. "Quick question," he said, pointing directly at Herr Mueller with his laser pointer. "What's your current throughput capacity at your primary distribution hub?" Wrong question. Wrong approach. Wrong tone entirely. I tried damage control. "Our analysis focuses on Muller Industries' systematic expansion across Central European markets," I said in German, attempting to redirect toward the 3-year strategic plan they actually cared about. "The optimization opportunities we've identified align with your established operational philosophy." Kyle cut me off. "Let's stay focused on ROI metrics and scalability frameworks here." That was the moment I watched Herr Mueller make his decision. Not angry, just calculating. like he was already mentally drafting the polite email that would end this relationship before it could recover. Here's what Kyle didn't understand about international logistics. It's not about disruption, it's about reliability. When you're coordinating 10,000 containers monthly between Hamburg and Baltimore, you want someone who understands that a 2-day delay in customs clearance costs $500,000 in demurrage fees. You want expertise, not innovation theater. I'd built this relationship systematically. I knew Herr Muller's daughter was studying international business at Northwestern. I knew Muller Industries had been burned by previous consultants who promised transformation and delivered chaos. They valued methodical approaches over flashy presentations, long-term partnerships over quarterly performance metrics. Kyle knew none of this context. He was delivering the same standardized pitch he'd probably used in Cleveland and Phoenix, making minor adjustments for what corporate called European market considerations. I stood up, shook hands formally with each member of the Muller team, and excused myself from the room. My pulse was hammering, but my hands stayed steady. In the hallway, I didn't pace or check my phone. Just stood against the wall listening to Kyle's voice continue inside, still confident, still oblivious to the disaster he'd created. 10 minutes later, Hannah from Apex's junior staff emerged, gave me a nervous glance like I might be contagious, and hurried toward the elevators. Then Kyle appeared with that same corporate smile, walking past me like I was furniture that didn't match the lobby aesthetic. I waited half a minute, then went back into the conference room. The Mueller team sat in professional silence, papers half organized, coffee growing cold. Nobody moved when I entered. I looked directly at Herr Mueller and extended my hand. "I appreciate your time and patience," I said in German. "Today's development was unexpected. I'll excuse myself so that Apex can proceed with their presentation." He shook my hand with a slight nod, professional but pointed. In that moment, I saw something shift in his expression. Not sympathy, but recognition. Like he was seeing me clearly for the first time, separate from the corporate machinery that had just steamrolled over both of us. I left the building and walked 5 flights down the stairwell before realizing I'd never pressed the elevator button. Just kept moving, past floors where I'd built other partnerships, past company names that used to represent professional aspiration. By the time I reached street level, Munich's cold air hit me hard enough to clear the adrenaline fog. I found a bench across from Muller Tower and sat down, staring up at those 40 floors of glass and steel where my career had just taken an unexpected turn. I didn't pull out my phone to call Chicago, didn't fire off angry texts to colleagues, just sat there processing what had happened and what it meant. Kyle thought he'd eliminated a problem, but all he'd really done was create an opportunity I hadn't known I wanted. I didn't go back to my hotel, didn't book the next flight to Chicago. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to a coffee shop near Marienplatz and opened my laptop. The decision hit me like flipping a switch. Either crawl home with my tail between my legs or do something about this situation. I'd been carrying around some paperwork for months. Nothing dramatic, just an LLC filing I'd never submitted. Patterson Strategic Solutions. I'd even secured a Munich address through a virtual office service, thinking maybe someday I'd branch out on my own. That someday had just arrived ahead of schedule. 1 click, filed. The email to Muller Industries took me 30 minutes to write and another 15 to revise. I must have started over 6 times, trying to strike the right balance between professional and personal, confident and respectful. Subject line: continued partnership opportunity. Patterson Strategic Solutions. Herr Muller, should Muller Industries remain interested in systematic supply chain optimization, I would be honored to continue our discussions independently. The solutions we've developed together remain available outside corporate constraints. The relationship we've built transcends any single company affiliation. Respectfully, Drew Patterson. I read it 3 times, then hit send before I could second-guess myself. My pulse actually slowed down when I heard that whoosh sound. Not because I was calm, but because the decision was made. And when I make a decision, I don't look back. 4 hours later, my phone buzzed with a German number I didn't recognize. Patterson, Herr Patterson? This is Dr. Weber from Mueller Industries. We received your message. Herr Muller would like to schedule a discussion tomorrow morning, if you're available. I almost laughed out loud in that coffee shop. Yes, I'm available. Excellent. 10 o'clock sharp. Same building, but we'll use the executive conference room on the 42nd floor. Herr Mueller asks that you bring your unfiltered recommendations, what you would implement if corporate constraints were not a factor. That night, I worked on something Kyle would never understand, a real proposal tailored to Mueller's actual needs. Not corporate template number 47 with minor modifications, but genuine solutions built from 15 years of logistics experience and over a year of understanding this specific client. I stripped out every page of Apex's bureaucratic padding. No mission statements, no corporate methodology frameworks, no legal disclaimers that said nothing while covering everything. 18 pages of pure substance. Container slot optimization strategies, customs harmonization protocols, port authority relationship management, performance metrics tied to actual cost savings, not theoretical projections. And one key change that would either make or break this whole gamble, a 12% success fee upon contract execution. No milestone payments, no performance reviews, no committee approvals, just results-based compensation that aligned my interests completely with theirs. The morning meeting felt different from the moment I walked in. Same people, entirely different energy. Herr Muller started with a direct question that told me everything about where his head was. Herr Patterson, yesterday's corporate presentation contained operational improvements we found intriguing. Can you implement these recommendations without Apex infrastructure backing you? More effectively without it, I said. No corporate overhead eating into budgets. No committee approvals slowing implementation. No standardized solutions that ignore your specific operational culture. Dr. Weber leaned forward, clearly the skeptical voice they designated. Our procurement protocols require competitive bidding from multiple vendors. Can you accommodate our timeline and transparency requirements? I can have a complete implementation plan ready by Friday morning. Fixed costs, binding performance guarantees, measurable outcomes. No corporate markup, no hidden fees, no change orders that appear 6 months into the project. Hoffman, their finance director, who'd been silent during yesterday's disaster, finally spoke up. What assurance do we have that you can deliver at the scale Muller Industries requires? This isn't a boutique consulting project. This was the moment I'd been preparing for without knowing it. I opened my laptop and pulled up files I'd been maintaining since my second month at Apex. Detailed performance data from every major European logistics project I'd managed. I've personally overseen the Hamburg-Baltimore optimization for Apex's 3 largest accounts. Combined annual container volume of 47,000 20-foot equivalent units. Same operational challenges you're facing. Port congestion, customs delays, inefficient return logistics coordination. Here's the actual performance data, not corporate marketing projections. For the next hour and 20 minutes, we talked real logistics. No buzzwords, no paradigm shifts, just technical problem solving between people who understood the industry. Container slot allocation algorithms, customs broker relationship management, demurrage cost optimization, the kind of detailed operational discussion that Kyle would have found boring, but that actually saves companies millions of dollars. They didn't give me an answer in that meeting. Germans don't work that way. They process information systematically, run it through internal reviews, build consensus methodically. But Herr Muller walked me personally to the elevator, which in German business culture is essentially a handshake agreement. We will review your proposal thoroughly, he said. We appreciate directness in professional relationships, Herr Patterson. This has been refreshingly specific. By Friday afternoon, they'd signed €180 million contract over 3 years. Clean terms, performance-based milestones, and that 12% success fee wired to my new business account before the ink was dry on the signature pages. I didn't build a corporate website. No press releases, no LinkedIn announcement, no fake testimonials about entrepreneurial vision. Just a professional email address, a clean proposal template, and a Munich phone number that rang directly to my desk during European business hours. That first week, exactly 4 people knew Patterson's Strategic Solutions existed. 3 at Muller Industries and a legal consultant in Frankfurt who specialized in international trade agreements and didn't ask unnecessary questions about client confidentiality. By the second week, something interesting started happening. Word began leaking, but not from me, from the work itself. A procurement director I'd worked with 2 years ago sent me an email from her personal Gmail account. Drew, heard through the grapevine that you're consulting independently now. We've got a situation with our current logistics provider that sounds like something you've solved before. Any interest in a conversation? Then Amsterdam called. A mid-tier logistics operation I'd helped streamline back when I first joined Apex. Smart company, detail-oriented management, impossible to please. Exactly the kind of client that separates real expertise from corporate smoke blowing. They'd gone radio silent 6 months earlier after Kyle tried pushing them into some digital transformation package they neither wanted nor needed. Apex had written them off as resistant to innovation. The email was 3 sentences. Heard you're available for direct engagement. We've been waiting for the right opportunity to restart our optimization project. Please call when convenient. I didn't chase any of these opportunities. Never had to. Because here's what Kyle fundamentally misunderstood about this industry. I knew every operational pain point in these European supply chains. I'd mapped their inefficiencies, identified their bottlenecks, understood where their current contracts were too rigid, and where their operations teams were frustrated with vendor performance. I wasn't pitching theoretical solutions. I was solving actual problems that kept logistics managers awake at night. Everything ran through encrypted communication and secure cloud storage. No corporate Slack channels, no junior analysts, no account management bureaucracy. Patterson Strategic Solutions was me, two experienced local contractors on retainer for specialized projects, and a discreet banking relationship with a Munich firm that understood international trade financing. By the end of that month, 7 companies had quietly paused their Apex European engagements for what their procurement teams called strategic review periods. None of them mentioned my name in their corporate communications, but industry networks run on relationships, and people talk to people they trust. Kyle, I'm certain, assumed I'd disappeared. Probably figured I'd slunk back to Chicago, maybe landed some bloated VP position at a competitor where I could nurse my wounded ego in middle management comfort. He had absolutely no clue I was still in Munich, working 18-hour days, systematically serving clients he thought were locked into Apex contracts for the long term. Every time my phone rang, it represented another thread pulling loose from Apex's European foundation. Not dramatic client theft, just quiet professional competence filling gaps that corporate bureaucracy couldn't address. The 7th declined calendar invite came in on a Thursday morning. 1 week, 7 unavailable responses from companies that had never missed scheduled calls with Apex. No explanations, no rescheduling attempts, just professional silence that spoke louder than any complaint letter. Amsterdam, Vienna, 2 from Brussels, 1 from Zurich that usually confirmed meetings 10 minutes early, and 2 from smaller operations in Prague and Budapest. All of them suddenly had scheduling conflicts or were reassessing vendor relationships. That afternoon, Kyle sent out his second company-wide memo in 2 weeks. Someone forwarded it to me within 30 minutes, probably Lisa, my former assistant who'd maintained a network of friends throughout Apex's European operations. Subject line: proactive client relationship management. Kyle's tone had shifted from confident to controlling, with undertones of barely concealed panic. Team, we're implementing enhanced retention protocols for our European portfolio. Focus on contract renewal conversations. Prioritize FaceTime with decision makers. Let's demonstrate the value proposition that made Apex the preferred logistics partner. He still didn't understand that the problem wasn't his value proposition. It was his complete inability to deliver on the relationships that made those propositions credible in the first place. The guy they brought in to help was Tom Bradley from Apex's London office. Impressive resume, proper British accent, looked competent in video calls. Unfortunately, he opened his first meeting with a Munich-based supplier by pronouncing the city like it rhymed with lunch. 3 times in 5 minutes. Nobody corrected him. They just let him advertise his ignorance while Kyle nodded along like this was exactly the kind of cultural expertise their European clients needed. That same week, I got a call from Lisa around midnight Munich time. She'd left Apex 3 months earlier for a position with better work-life balance, but still had friends in HR who shared interesting information over drinks. Drew, you need to know what's happening over here. They're completely scrambling about your departure paperwork. Nobody can find any official termination documents. I pulled up my email archive while she talked, searching for anything related to employment status or contract obligations. Found exactly what I expected to find. They what? Kyle told everyone you were reassigned to special projects, not fired. HR assumed legal handled the paperwork. Legal thought operations took care of it. Operations figured Kyle had everything covered. Nobody filed anything official. 3 weeks before the Munich disaster, I'd sent Kyle a direct email asking about my employment status following the organizational restructuring he'd mentioned. Subject line, clarifying role transition and contract obligations. Professional, straightforward, covering my bases like any experienced employee should. No response. I'd followed up twice over the next 10 days. Still nothing. The email chain sat in my sent folder with timestamps, delivery confirmations, and a complete record of corporate negligence. Tell your friends in HR not to worry about it, I said. Why not? Because there's nothing to file. They never properly terminated me. Kyle just assumed I'd fade away quietly. Jesus, Drew, that's a massive legal exposure for them. Not Jesus, just corporate incompetence at the executive level. 2 weeks later, the European Logistics Quarterly ran a small industry piece. Nothing dramatic, just standard trade publication coverage about market developments. Mueller Industries expands direct vendor relationships. The article mentioned streamlined logistics, partnerships, and boutique consulting engagements without naming specific companies. My name appeared once, in the 4th paragraph. Industry sources confirm that Drew Patterson, formerly with Apex International, now operates independently as Patterson Strategic Solutions, focusing on relationship-driven supply chain optimization. Kyle's response was predictable and self-defeating. He stormed into Apex's PR department demanding immediate damage control. Wanted a press release, a media strategy, some way to get ahead of the narrative before it gained traction in industry circles. But what narrative could they possibly construct? That they'd fumbled a $240 million client relationship through cultural insensitivity? That they'd failed to properly manage the departure of the person who'd built that relationship? That their European division was hemorrhaging clients to a one-man consulting operation? Legal finally tried approaching me through official channels. Some carefully worded letter about intellectual property concerns and proprietary methodology usage and potential conflict of interest violations. I responded through my Frankfurt legal consultant with a single page that shut down their posturing immediately. Patterson Strategic Solutions operates entirely independently of any Apex intellectual property or proprietary systems. Mr. Patterson's employment status with Apex was never formally resolved despite multiple requests for clarification. Please see attached correspondence showing Mr. Patterson's attempts to address this matter, which received no corporate response. Any claims of contractual violation are therefore without legal foundation. Attach the entire email chain. Every ignored message, every unanswered question, every corporate silence that had left me in professional limbo while Kyle played executive theater. That ended their legal threats permanently. Inside Apex, the atmosphere shifted to something between panic and denial. People stopped mentioning my name in meetings, not out of disrespect, but out of fear that acknowledging my success would somehow make their own situation worse. They kept running analytics trying to explain why European client satisfaction scores were dropping and contract renewals were stalling. But spreadsheets couldn't capture what was really happening. This wasn't about data points or performance metrics. This was about trust, competence, and the fundamental difference between relationship management and relationship exploitation. Late one evening, my Munich phone rang. Unknown number, but the voice was unmistakable. Martin Hayes, original Apex investor and board member. The guy who'd built and sold 3 logistics companies before he was 50 now spent his time identifying acquisition targets and strategic opportunities. "I assume you're following the industry coverage of your situation," he said without preamble. "I am. You didn't leak any of it." Number, long pause. I could hear him thinking, probably reviewing notes or financial projections while he talked. Smart approach. Professional, discreet, results-focused. That's increasingly rare in this business. I waited for him to get to the point. "I want to meet. Off the record, no corporate involvement. I think there's an opportunity here that's bigger than one client relationship or one consulting contract." "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind where someone with your operational expertise gets proper financial backing to scale systematically. European logistics is consolidating rapidly. Small operators are getting squeezed out by cost pressure. Large operators are getting bureaucratic and losing client intimacy. There's a profitable gap in the middle for someone who understands both relationship management and operational efficiency." I looked out my Munich hotel window at the business district lights, thinking about all the conversations I'd had over the past 2 months with companies frustrated by their current logistics providers. Not just Apex clients, but firms working with other large consulting operations that had grown too corporate, too standardized, too removed from actual problem solving. "Where and when?" I asked. "Brussels. Tuesday morning, 10 sharp. I'll send location details." He hung up before I could ask follow-up questions, which told me everything about his confidence level and decision-making style. I opened a new document on my laptop and started mapping out everything I'd learned about European supply chain inefficiencies over 15 years of hands-on experience. Not theoretical frameworks or industry best practices, but specific operational problems that kept logistics managers awake at night and cost companies measurable money. By midnight, I had 57 distinct improvement opportunities identified across 9 different market segments, each one backed by real performance data, existing relationships, and competitive advantages that couldn't be replicated by hiring consultants or purchasing software platforms. Kyle thought I was running a small-scale revenge operation against Apex. Martin Hayes saw something completely different. A business model that could reshape how logistics consulting worked in Europe, built on competence rather than corporate infrastructure. For the first time since walking out of that Munich conference room, I was starting to see it too. The emergency board meeting happened in Brussels on a gray Tuesday morning. Neutral territory, private conference room at the Marriott, no assistants, no PR people, no corporate lawyers taking notes. Just 7 board members in expensive suits and one man who looked like he'd been awake for 3 straight days. Kyle walked in carrying a leather portfolio thick enough to be a doctoral dissertation, all desperate energy and forced confidence. He'd clearly spent the weekend preparing what he thought would be his defense presentation. Before we start, he announced to the room, "I want everyone to understand the scope of Drew's corporate sabotage. He's systematically targeted our European client base using proprietary information and established relationships that belong to Apex." Martin Hayes didn't look up from his phone, just slid a manila folder across the polished conference table with the casual indifference of someone who'd already made his decision. "This is your signature, Kyle," he said quietly. "You reassigned Patterson to special projects without filing proper termination paperwork. No legal documentation, no contract resolution, no enforceable post-employment restrictions." Kyle stared at the document like he was trying to read a foreign language. Patricia Reeves, the sharp-eyed board member I'd met once at a company retreat, spoke up with the kind of precision that made it clear she'd already done her homework. "So we essentially opened our client database and handed him the keys with a note saying, 'Please compete with us'?" Kyle tried to pivot, opening his portfolio to what looked like charts and performance metrics. "Look, the important thing is stopping him before this gets worse. Legal action, cease and desist orders, whatever enforcement mechanisms we have available." "With what legal basis?" Martin asked, still calm, still final. "Our attorneys confirmed yesterday that we have no enforceable agreements with Patterson post-departure." He attempted to clarify his employment status 3 separate times and received no corporate response. Klaus Hoffmann. Different Klaus. This one, a Frankfurt-based board member who specialized in international business law, leaned back in his leather chair with the expression of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion. "How many clients have we lost this quarter?" Kyle hesitated, which was answer enough for everyone in the room. "Define lost in this context," he said, trying to buy time. "Revenue no longer under active contract with Apex International." "Well, the situation is more complex than simple loss numbers. Some contracts are in review status, others are completing current terms." "Numbers, Kyle. Actual figures. Approximately 18% of European annual revenue is transitioning to alternative arrangements." The silence that followed was the kind that makes grown men consider career changes. 18% of European revenue meant roughly $67 million in annual contracts, not including the projected renewals that were now obviously never going to materialize. Patricia looked at Martin with raised eyebrows. "And Patterson's operation is handling how much of this transitioning revenue?" Martin consulted his laptop screen. "According to industry sources, Patterson Strategic Solutions has confirmed contracts worth approximately $42 million annually, with another $30 million in active negotiations." That's when they asked me to join the meeting. I'd been sitting in the hotel lobby for 40 minutes, watching European business travelers navigate their perfectly scheduled days while I waited for my professional future to be decided by people who'd never actually managed a logistics contract. Martin texted, "Conference room 412. We're ready." I walked into that room like I belonged there, which in a strange way, I did. These people needed me more than I needed them, and everyone at the table understood that dynamic. "Drew," Patricia started without wasting time on pleasantries, "we'd like to discuss a resolution that works for everyone involved." "I'm listening." Kyle couldn't restrain himself. "You took our client relationships and our operational methodology and repackaged them as your own consulting business. That's corporate theft, regardless of paperwork technicalities." I looked directly at him with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you're holding better cards than everyone else at the table. "I took the relationships I built through 15 years of competence and served those clients better than Apex was capable of serving them. That's called professional evolution. You violated confidentiality agreements. Show me one that was properly executed." Silence again. But this time it felt different. Not awkward, but decisive. Martin opened a different folder and spread documents across the table like he was dealing cards. Drew, we'd like to offer you a position as Senior Director of European Operations. 7-figure compensation package, full operational autonomy for your current client portfolio, integration back into Apex infrastructure with your consulting operation as a wholly owned subsidiary. Under Kyle's supervision, Kyle is pursuing other opportunities effective immediately. I let that information settle while Kyle's face cycled through several shades of pale. Then I presented the counteroffer I'd been developing since Martin's phone call. I'm interested in an acquisition discussion. Of what, specifically? My client portfolio and operational capabilities. Patterson Strategic Solutions becomes Patterson Strategic Division, fully integrated into Apex International. I maintain complete operational control of European logistics consulting. You acquire the revenue stream and the client relationships. Patricia frowned like someone had just suggested rewriting the laws of corporate physics. That's not typically how acquisitions are structured. It is when the alternative is watching your European division collapse while your former employee builds a competing operation using relationships you can't replicate. Martin was already running calculations on his laptop, probably building financial models in real time. Revenue projections for the acquired portfolio. Current confirmed contracts represent $78 million annually. Conservative pipeline projections suggest we'll exceed $100 million within 18 months, assuming proper relationship management and operational support. And your valuation expectations? 3.4 times annual revenue for the current portfolio, plus a 5-year operational control agreement that guarantees autonomy for European client relationships. Plus Kyle's immediate termination as a condition of the deal. Kyle stood up like someone had electrocuted his chair. This is extortion. You can't seriously consider rewarding corporate sabotage. This is business problem solving, I replied. You created a situation that's costing Apex millions in annual revenue. I'm offering you a solution that recovers most of those losses and positions the company for European expansion. The negotiation lasted 4 hours, back and forth on operational control provisions, revenue sharing structures, client transition protocols, and integration timelines. Martin Hayes proved to be exactly the kind of investor I'd hoped he was. Someone who understood that sustainable business growth comes from backing competence, not corporate politics. We settled on 3. 1 times annual revenue with a 7-year operational agreement that gave me complete autonomy over European client relationships while providing Apex with steady revenue growth and market expansion opportunities they couldn't achieve through conventional corporate development. Kyle cleaned out his office that afternoon. No farewell email, no transition meeting, just security escort to the parking garage and a severance package that probably cost less than 1 month of the revenue he'd destroyed. 8 weeks later, the acquisition closed. Patterson Strategic Solutions became Patterson Strategic Division, a specialized subsidiary of Apex International, with Drew Patterson as Managing Director of European Operations. The press release was corporate boilerplate that made the whole thing sound like a planned strategic expansion, rather than what it actually was. A hostile takeover disguised as a rescue operation. I kept my Munich office, my direct client relationships, my streamlined approach to logistics problem solving. The only changes were the letterhead design and the size of the wire transfers hitting my personal account every month. Herr Muller sent me a handwritten note on Muller Industries stationery. Herr Patterson, we are pleased to continue our partnership under the new corporate structure. Consistency in professional relationships remains valuable in our industry. That's as close to a celebration as German business culture allows. 4 months after the acquisition, I was back in Munich for the annual European Logistics Conference. Not as an attendee this time, but as the opening keynote speaker. The conference committee had specifically requested me to address relationship-based supply chain management in a consolidating market. The audience filled the main auditorium. 800 logistics professionals, including clients, competitors, vendors, and consultants who'd been following this whole situation from various distances. People who understood exactly what had happened and what it meant for the industry. I kept the speech focused on practical experience rather than theoretical frameworks. 15 years of hands-on logistics management distilled into 40 minutes of actionable advice about building trust, delivering measurable results, and treating business relationships like they actually matter in a world increasingly dominated by corporate standardization. The fundamental question in logistics consulting, I told them, is whether you're solving problems or managing contracts. The market consistently rewards problem solving, regardless of corporate structure or marketing sophistication. The applause was professional but genuine, recognition from people who'd spent their careers distinguishing between competence and corporate theater. Afterward, during the networking reception, Herr Muller approached me with a question that felt like a final exam I hadn't known I was taking. Herr Patterson, what would you say you learned from this entire experience? I thought about it while sipping German beer and watching logistics professionals network with the systematic efficiency their industry demanded. That competence is the only sustainable competitive advantage. Everything else is just marketing. He nodded with the kind of approval that meant more than any performance bonus. Very practical conclusion. That night, I sat in my Munich hotel room looking out at the city lights, thinking about Kyle Brennan and wondering where he'd landed. Probably at another consulting firm, pitching the same disruption frameworks to a new set of clients who didn't know his track record yet. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I'd built something real from what looked like professional disaster, turned a humiliation into an acquisition opportunity, proved that in business, like in logistics, competence eventually finds its proper compensation level if you're patient enough to let market forces work. My name is Drew Patterson. I'm 41 years old, managing director of European operations for a company that tried to throw me away. That's how you handle corporate politics when you understand the difference between job security and professional value. Sometimes the best revenge is just doing your job better than the people who thought they could replace you.